You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, welcome to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio. I am your host, Rick Thompson. This show is about sobriety and recovery. Each week, we discuss a different topic relating to addiction with the aim that you can gain some insight, guidance, and hope from our discussions. We focus the show in 3 different segments. 1, the viewpoint of the families dealing with the family members suffering from alcoholism and addiction so they may assist them in obtaining treatment. 2, the psychological trauma and emotional damage alcoholics and addicts and their families experience. 3, the role of the insurance companies and associate providers and their part in the recovery process.
Welcome to the show. Tonight, I've got an old friend on. He's a special guest, and I feel very fortunate to have him here because he is very serious about recovery. His name is Paulo C. Good evening, Paulo. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rick. Glad to be here.
Can you please share with our audience your story from the beginning and how you arrived at the place where you wanted to change your life and get sober?
Absolutely. As I said, my name is Paulo, and I'm an alcoholic. This time I've been sober and free of any mind-altering chemicals for almost 25 years. I grew up in the Northeast, up in the Boston area. My family are immigrants from Italy, central Italy. They got here in the early 20s before the Depression, and my family grew up. My father grew up during the Depression. My grandfather didn't speak any English, and they lived in the Italian section of Boston called the North End. And what my family knew was just hard work and, not starving. And basically it was really rough during the Depression from what my dad told me. He went away and actually was shot and wounded about 20 miles from where he was born in Italy, and basically came back and started a family. My mother was a nurse. She was from Chicago, and they met. He was in the VA hospital for a while, recovering from the wound. And then they started up a family. And back then, the families were really, really big in the 50s. I had 4 other brothers and 1 sister. I have a twin brother. And, as I found out a little later, everybody in my family, including uncles, were addicted. I had an uncle that was a heroin addict, but my dad was alcoholic. My mother's alcoholic. She's sober almost 40-something years, and
That's
my
incredible.
sister's sober 30-something years. I've had two of my brothers have died from heroin overdoses, and the other 2 are somewhat recovering in alcoholism. But I was very fortunate to be the only male in my family that got clean and sober. I don't know how it happened, but that's between me and God. But grew up in this Italian family, and my dad was really regimented from the Army, and it was like military style. He used to wake us up with a bell, and the 3 of us slept in a room, my twin brother and my younger brother. The other 2 were in other room, and my sister stayed down in her room across from my parents. And basically, my dad was working all the time. My mother was taking care of the kids, and so the alcoholism was already started at a young age. When I got to be about 12, 13, we moved. We actually lived in Rhode Island for a little bit, in Providence, and moved out to the suburbs of Boston. And my dad was the head of a couple of unions, and so he was our union boss, and he was, a really big contractor, and so he was involved with important people and always working. So at that young age, the alcoholism was starting, and basically they used to have these big parties at the house, and there'd be contractors there and influential people, and there was always booze and stuff. And
How old were you then when this started? What was your first recollection of when your parents would drink?
Well, I was just getting to that.
Okay.
I can remember coming out and seeing a bottle of Chianti. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's wine with a little rope around the thing. And I kind of got up on the chair and pulled it down from the cabinet and took a slug off the wine. got kind of a little buzz. And I think I was probably 7 years old, maybe 8 years old. Anyways, I didn't do anything for years, but I can remember my parents sent us away to private school. They wanted us for the best, and basically they just really didn't have time for us. So my dad was making money. So we went to a private school till we were in 8th grade. And when I got to 8th grade at 13 years old, I was really, really a fabulous athlete and was really good at sports. And my brother started smoking weed, and I can remember him having weed at the house, and I didn't really want any part of that. But I can remember starting at 13, 14 years old, being interested in girls and starting to see that, you know, that kind of life was where I wanted to be. And basically, I think we went to a party at about 14 years old, and I took and drank a bunch of beer and threw up, but I liked the way it made me feel. And so I was kind of an alcoholic before I was an alcoholic, if you know what I mean.
Understood.
So then it started, and I got to high school and basically had a lot of anger in me, but I was very good at football, and I was a hitter, and I think I took all my anger out there. But my brother had just come back from Vietnam, and he was into motorcycles, so there were always motorcycle guys around the house, and my parents had just split. My typical night was my mother and father fighting and drunk and no one ever around. And so sometimes I'd come there and the cops were there. And so they split up, and half of my family went to live with my mother and half of my family went to live with my dad.
Was there violence involved between your parents when the alcoholism?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can remember coming home and the police being there, and my father handcuffed to the railing with mother with a bloody lip. She would drink and start on him, and he didn't know how to handle it. And he would, you know, I don't know, he'd take a couple of swings at it. He wasn't really a violent person, but he did the best he could with that too. He wasn't, you know, my dad didn't come equipped with many social skills. You know, he didn't know much about bringing up a family. He didn't know much about love. He just knew that, you know, money and all that, it took him from the depression, that was where he wanted to be. So anyways, started getting a lot of awards for sports, and there were scouts coming by and wanting me to go to college there in Boston. And I can remember being at awards dinners and nobody was there, and there were kids with their parents. And I can remember after games, kids would go with their parents. They'd come to pick them up, and I'd walk home. And one time I was walking home, and it was through this church parking lot and up through the woods to get down to my house. And back then they had guys with black leather jackets and pointed shoes, and you know, they got me, and they beat on me, and I was beaten up pretty good. And I don't know, I had a lot of anger inside me, and all of a sudden I started kind of rebelling and stuff, and I drank some booze, and I noticed that it gave me beer muscles and made me feel like not so inferior.
Right.
From the first time I picked up a drink at 16 years old, I went down and got my brother's ID and started going and buying alcohol because it was 18 in Massachusetts at the time, and I was 16, and I got in a lot of trouble. And before I was 18, I'd already been in the House of Correction for alcohol-related stuff, and I got to my last year of high school. And
how many times were you incarcerated for your alcoholic behavior when you were young?
Say again?
How many times were you incarcerated for your alcoholic behavior or something that had to do with alcoholism?
Well, a couple of times as a juvenile, and then when I turned 18, I don't know, probably 30. But anyways, the final straw for me was that I was kicked off the football team because I was drinking and hanging out with these guys, and you know, just I guess what I was feeling inside me. I don't really remember it, but without that, I didn't have anything left anymore. So I started hanging around with some pretty bad guys, and you know, those guys that beat me up, I made them pay for it. And you know, that's what I started being like. I noticed that
you became a predator.
I was a pretty tough kid. Yeah, I was a pretty tough kid, and I had a lot of anger in me. Anyways, I was 18 years old, and I got in the car, and I was out drunk one night in a blackout. We robbed a gas station, and I hit the attendant and almost killed him. I knocked him out with a bottle. When I came to in the cell, they told me that the guy, may or may not make it. So, anyways, he pulled through. I went to court. I got 5 years for assault, and I was in the reformatory in Concord, which is it's one of the toughest prisons in Massachusetts. And so it was there that they started bringing in AA to me. They said to me, we know you have a problem with alcohol, and everything that you've done, you've been related to when you've been drinking. And, they brought this guy in for an AA. So they asked me if I wanted to go to AA. And I said, well, and my mother had come a couple times to see me, and she had just gotten sober. She was like a year or two sober. Mm-hmm. She said, well, you should try the thing. Well, they had brought in a guy, and you always say that, and that's why this is important for me to do too, is that you never know when you're going to hear your story, or you never know when God's going to use you as a tool to help another person. And they brought in a guy, and he had gotten a flat tire out on a freeway and out on the highway, and some guy stopped to help him, and I guess he beat him with a tire wrench in a blackout, and didn't even know he did it. And so they brought that guy in to speak. And after the thing, I grabbed him and I said, "Can I talk to you?" He said, "Yeah." And I started talking to him, and he said that, this is, if you're alcoholic like I am, and it sounds like you are, this is your only way out, kid, And I said, okay. And so they told me after I was in there almost 2 years that I could get out early if I went to AA and took urine tests and, stuck with the program. I completed the whole, a couple of times the parole officer showed up, and I had been drinking, but the guy said to me, you seem like a pretty good guy, and you got a problem. You got to keep sticking with it. I'm not gonna put you back inside there because you've come a long way. And when I left there, they told me that there was probably a 50% or 80% chance that I'd be back. Mm-hmm. And, that guy gave me a break, and I don't know, the hand of God reached out. I started going to AA, and I got into it. I didn't really believe in any of it. I just didn't want to go back to jail. And then after I had been sober for almost, 3-4 years and got off parole, I started again, and this time I got into drugs. I didn't drink a whole lot because I did get a couple of drunk drivings after, and it went on. And about a month before my 29th birthday, I took my last drink of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And then my 6th drunk driving, or driving while you're intoxicated, and they put me back in a program. They took my license and said, if you stay in the program. So I stayed in it, and things got a little better, and I didn't drink for a really long time. And when I got off of the probation, I was almost 6.5 years without a drink or a drug. And I had been forced to take this, and in my head I thought, well, maybe I'm not alcoholic now because I've gone 6.5 years. But I knew the pain I'd been through with alcohol, so I got me a sack of drugs and some cocaine, and I locked myself in a room.
Off to the races.
And went for 3 days, and I got cocaine poisoning. I rushed to the hospital, was hallucinating, seeing things. Almost died, and that was 24 plus years ago. The doctor said to me the most incredible thing I've ever had happen, and he said, and I'll remember it as clear as I'm sitting here today. The guy said to me, you had been clean. The girl told me you were clean, and you gone AA, and he said, for you, the ultimate high would be an overdose. I said, say that again, Doc? I really don't understand that. He says, well, what it means, my friend, is that you can't get any higher than you did. You're not a social type drinker or drugger, so you're going to do it till you overdose.
Right.
And so that really kind of took the fun out of it. It kind of like took,
I think so.
I got it.
Yeah,
and so I got back to AA, and I got in, and this time, was a lot humbler for me because, there were guys coming up to me and saying, hey, man, I need to talk to you. And I was like, look, I relapsed, man. And I was sober the first time. I thought I was hip, slick, and cool, and I thought I had all the answers and thought I knew everything. And, that kind of put me where I realized that I was grateful and lucky to be alive. And not only to get a second chance at life, but to get a second chance at sobriety, you know. And I remember they came to me in the treatment place and they said to me, you know, they're all guys in there moaning and doing what they do, and you know, like, oh, you know, if I can do this and that, and they said, well, we want you to write down on a piece of paper all the things that are important to you. And like everybody was putting like their family or their job and this and that, and I put down being sober. And the guy said to me, I think you're going to stay sober. I said, how do you know that? He said, because you got your priority in the right place.
Right.
And you know, and I'd already been in jail. I'd already seen some crazy stuff and had been through some pretty heavy duty stuff, and so I knew without a doubt that I didn't want to go there. And so I just took, you know, if they told me to jump off a building, I would have said which one. If they told me, you know, do this, I said no problem. And so started for me, and you know, I had a really rough time getting back the second time. It wasn't easy. I mean, my sponsor used to say to me, you know, all you got to do is stay sober for a day. I said, I don't know if I can do that. And he said, why? I said, I just keep thinking about getting loaded again, you know. And he said, even though I knew I didn't want to do it, and I knew, but it's just the insanity was still in my head. And he said, well, you know, then do you think you can stay sober for an hour? I said, I'm not sure. He said, how about a minute? No, I said, I'm not really sure. He says, okay, my friend, well, for you, we have the 60-second program. And that's how I stayed sober. I stayed sober a minute at a time. Yeah, right. You know, a minute turned into an hour hour into days, days into weeks into months, and months into years. Right. And then one day, I don't know, the just insanity of getting loaded just left the building, as they say. I was just done with it. And things happened, and for me, it was really tough because, you know, I never really had a legal job. I didn't go to college. I mean, I was a street kid, and the street taught me how to feel, what to do. And for me, waking up in the morning, the con was on. I mean, I'd look in the mirror, and my mind was already up before me. So I knew nothing about doing legal stuff, and all I knew is the neighborhood I was from is that you either died, you were in jail, or you were a criminal. And that's the way I came up. And, you know, getting into AA was completely different for me. And so I had to figure out a way to make my life happen without being a con, because I realized that, and I've done that in sobriety, where you've cheated people out of money and done stuff, and it's hard to stay sober doing that kind of life. So I don't know, I got lucky and I went to school, and that was 20, you know, the year I got sober. I went to school and I didn't have any money and didn't know where my next dollar was coming from, but I did know that I had faith that it would get better. And, you know, I never know where my next dollar is coming from even today, or I do know that if I don't drink the drug that, you know, I'm going to get through that day. It may not be the way I want it to be, and it may not be perfect, but it'd be a lot better than if I was getting loaded.
Absolutely, 100%.
My faith has become unshakable because of it. I mean, I've had stuff happen to me. My oldest brother was murdered from a heroin overdose. My twin brother overdosed at my father's house. My father died of alcoholism. He died in my arms. I've had situations happen to me in sobriety from the stuff I did when I was first newly sober. I had, and I've been locked up in sobriety and done stuff that I'm not proud about. And things have always worked themselves out. Luckily, you know, 20-something years later, here I am, and you know, my life is good today, and it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was when I came in too. You know, I just keep chugging along and try to go to meetings and help other alcoholics. I talk to alcoholics every day, and you know, we talk about stuff, and the stuff that's not perfect in us that, you know, is alcoholism, and that, you know, need to be changed. And I think when you're able to see it and you're able to identify it and laugh about it, can change it and get better, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty much the way my story went. And well, as I say, it hasn't been an easy road. I mean,
it never is for any of us.
Yeah. But, you know, when I was back, when my dad was dying and I was back around, or when my twin died, I was around people that I had gotten loaded with for many, many years. And, you know, most of them didn't make it out, or the ones that did, they're full-blown alcoholics today, or they're still in trouble. And to think that, having this addiction and going to AA was the worst thing that could ever happen to a person. I thought that was worse than jail. I remember the first time they offered me to when I was a juvenile, they offered me to either join a branch of the service or get locked up. I said, I'd rather be locked up.
Right.
And so today I just see people and they're in their 50s. So thing that I didn't think was a blessing it's offered me an opportunity to change so many things in my life, because alcoholism is just the tip of the iceberg. There's just so many other isms. That's why they call it alcoholism, not alcoholism.
That's right.
I've had issues with food and relationships, and we could go on and on and on here. Like everything else, I've had to change so many things in my life. But because I learned about that first step and learned that all things were possible with my relationship with my higher power, it gives me the ability to see those things and change them. And,
right.
These are tools, most unbelievable tools anybody could have. I have some people saying to me, they see me and they know I don't drink and stuff like that, and they just see that my life is very good in areas, and they're marveled at that. And I owe that to my mother, God bless her. She kept bringing me the program, and it just seems like the people closest to you really can't get you sober. But she's 40-something years, 45 years.
Amazing.
One of the greatest things is that we were talking just the other day, and she said to me, I was able to help her, and she's down in Florida, and she just has got a great life. She's 90-something years old, and, I just think how she's just brought that deal to me. So she was the one, and then the relationship with God. You and I talk a lot, and it's a lot of stuff that's crazy, but, you just weather through it, and another day comes along, and nothing lasts forever, not the good stuff nor the bad.
That's
and
also true.
The way we handle stuff is that I think from being sober is that you get the tools, and you have the ability to see stuff, and the peaks and valleys aren't as bad as when you first come in and your life levels off and stuff happens. And I never thought I could get through some of the stuff I've gotten through, but it's been okay. And, without AA, I'm just, and without a loving God, without my relationship with a loving God, I don't know. I don't know how anybody gets through life. I really don't. Maybe church people, they go to church and they get it, and, they're good, and I get that, and I know there's a lot of paths to God, but, when you got isms and they're running rampant, and
yeah, it's kind of hard to see God in the picture.
For me, I needed a little more than church. I needed something that was real,
Mm-hmm.
I needed something with skin on it,
yes.
Something I could see, feel, and touch, and so, anyway, it's been an unbelievable ride, and I'm just, grateful for another day of clean and sober. At night, I thank God, and in the morning, I ask Him for another day of sobriety, and that's about where it starts, and that's where it ends.
That's an incredible story. You and I have known each other for almost 24 years now, and we've both been through, some pretty, heavy peaks and valleys. I want to, before we go to a break, I want to ask you a question. When you were a kid, how did you deal with your feelings when you were watching your father and mother go at it, and the violence would happen, the police would come, and all that drama? How did you deal with that? And how did you deal with the neighbors in the neighborhood and having to, put on a brave face or protect? Or did you feel you had to protect your father and mother when they were drinking from the outside world?
I know this much, that, my father was kind of a military kind of guy, and family, you didn't show your feelings. You didn't talk about it. A man was a man, and so you had to stuff everything. And I remember they sent us away to camp one time, and as they were coming up after a month at camp, they were coming up the road, and as they were coming up, I had to fake like I fell down because I started crying, and I didn't want them to see me crying. So I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, my feelings were stuffed, and they were stuffed deep, and I had a lot of anger inside of me. I had a lot of anger towards my father, and, I was just going to be, so I didn't get hurt like that again, I was going to be the toughest guy there was. And, when I got to AA, I didn't have coping skills. I had street survival skills. That's all I knew, was surviving. I knew nothing about what was inside of me and how I felt. So I think the best way I can answer that is that I think I stuffed my feelings to be able to deal with what was going on, and I masked it.
Well, I can appreciate that. I know I did a lot of that in my life. Go with Paulo. I've got some questions here for you. The first one I want to show, I thought about this first question as you were talking, and I wasn't sure if I was going to ask it, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it anyway. What were the specific pivotal points and or outside determining factors that actually led you into the path of recovery? Like the wake-up moments.
When I was in prison for the long stretch, yeah.
Which prison were you in? Prison were you in?
It's called Concord State Prison. It's in Massachusetts. But when they bring you in there, and I mean it's the real deal in there, and it's when you get in there and then that door shuts the first night, you kind of. It's a clarifying moment.
Yes, it is.
It's a moment of clarity. You kind of reflect on where you've been and, what happened and where you're at now.
Dark day. It's a very dark day.
Yeah, well, the ride down, it was 45-minute ride down, like an hour ride there. And, I was like, oh, man. Yeah, that first night, it was just horrible. Mm-hmm. One of the low spots.
How was your interaction with your parents during this time when you were locked up?
My father felt bad. I mean, they were both raging alcoholics, so they kind of looked at it like, I think they felt bad, but my mom was scared for me, and my dad was doing what he could to maybe get me out of there. So, trying to pull some strings and see if we could get me to a minimum security or out to the minimum security
farm or whatever they call it.
Yeah. You just have to be there for a while for that. So.
Did you ever have discussions with your father about that experience, or your mother, when you got out?
Well, I went to live with my dad. One of the things for parole is I had to have a job and a place to live. So he was living with his girlfriend, so he moved from his girlfriend and opened up his life to me to help me. I think he felt responsible, and he actually was a really good father. He just didn't come with many tools to be able to cope with being a dad,
Sure.
So I mean, when you come from another country and, your dad is functional and we don't talk either, I mean, it's just like we didn't have a whole lot of heavy duty discussions. He just, no one had a remedy for it. I had alcoholism, and, no one really had the remedy like they do today. I mean, it wasn't like it was back then, it was mostly older people. I'm 17 to 20 years old, and it was mostly old people, not kids, young kids right, coming in at 17. So, I mean, I couldn't identify with a 65-year-old guy. But I'll tell you this much, I thank God for the drugs. It brought me in a lot quicker than I would have come in.
That's
Who knows?
True.
I mean, I don't know.
I understand that.
But
sure.
I think today it's more accepted and it's different than it was.
In reference to the steps, the 12 steps in your 12-step program, at what point did you begin to work them, and how long did it take you to finish them? Now, with that in mind, can you explain how your 12-step program has helped you out not only with your recovery, but in your daily life as well?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. As I said before, alcoholism, when you take the drink out of a person, it's symptom. I mean, and it's helped me to relate every little thing that's happening in my life to do that like a first step, whether it's food or sex or there's anything. So those steps will work. It took me a while. The first time, I didn't understand. The God part scared me. I can remember when I was going to Catholic school, they told me that, if you did this, you were going straight to hell. So my concept, I didn't even, the back of my hair on my neck would bristle, I had a really rough time with standing step 3 and, wherever the God word was. But the first time I just stayed sober on pure, I don't know, man. I don't know what it was. I just thank God. I mean, God takes care of drunks and fools, and I think He took care of me till I was able to hear. When your ears open, you hear, and the blind see, and it's just one of those deals. And
in our case,
so I just think the second time after I relapsed, and I wasn't as cool that second time, and when I almost died, I knew that. And there were people that had been sober a while with me, and I felt, in a way, kind of ashamed. But, I didn't understand the disease that much. But I did what they told me to do, and, I worked them the best I could and didn't understand them, but I did what they said for me to do. and I did them pretty quick. And then, then I learned that I can go back and at any time and work on them again, and I can work them in steps 3 and 7 and 10 and 11. I mean, they turned out, and 8 and 9 have turned out to be daily things in my life. Right. I mean, it is, sometimes I just wake up wrong and I'll leash into somebody, like I'll just lash out at them like I used to. And 8 and 9 has given me the ability, and 10 is, hey, sorry I did that. I mean, sorry wasn't in my suit when I got to AA. Yeah, so it's helped me, and been able to implement these in my life. It's changed my life, and it's, and it's helped me to see that in others too. I hope that answers it. I mean,
it does actually. It's a brilliant answer because it's completely honest. At what point did you want to be more than sober? That you got there and you arrive and you're there and you've been sober for a while and you look around and you want more out of life.
Like I was 10 or 11 years old. When I first got in the second time, I was like speaking all over the place. I mean, I finally got sick and tired of hearing my own self. I remember one time going to a place and there was just like 2 guys falling asleep in the AA hall. And I was like,
yeah, that's never encouraging.
But I needed that, because the first time I thought I was like, I'd speak and there'd be like 200 people, and I thought I was wonderful.
Right.
The human ego is pretty funny.
With us.
And so anyways, I don't know, I realized that once I had a trade and I was doing it legally, I realized that this is nice. And so it gave me financial security, because I used to suffer from that on a daily basis. And still, sometimes I do get up in the morning and think, and I have plenty, but I think that I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be sleeping on the street that night. I think it just gave me the ability to want more and have a peaceful life and have stability. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I guess after I got a trade, after I had a good trade and provided me, and when I do a good job, I would be really grateful for that, and would make me feel good, and I get paid good money for doing a good job,
Right.
And so, and I didn't have to look over my shoulder. I wasn't getting arrested. I mean, there was nothing illegal about it, so that was a new twist.
Yeah, that's certainly fresh and reassuring. What advice could you give someone on how to make their recovery more meaningful and rich for them? And what have been your challenges in your recovery?
I'm not a strong one for advice, but I can give you my experiences. And my experiences have been that it's a slow haul. Mm-hmm. It's not an overnight. I mean, none of us have overnight sensations. Mm-hmm. None of us have a straight line to God. None of us have the answers. We get the answers from the accounts of our experiences, both good and bad, and things mm-hmm. that happen to you, or like happened to me, that I used to think were bad, those have turned out to be strong suits. So weaknesses have become strengths, and I think that all we have are the accounts of our experiences, both good and bad. And when something happens that's bad, the only way I've ever learned anything in life is through pain. And pain is the touchstone to all spiritual growth. I just know that. And
yes, it is.
That has helped me. I have a situation going on in my life right now, and no one held a gun to my head with it, but I'm standing straight up with it, and I'm taking the responsibility for it, mm-hmm. because I was the one that it was my idea. Nobody forced me. Right. And so the only way for me to change is to be able to identify it, see it, work it through, and identify it, inventory of it, and see where I was wrong and how I could change that in my life, so I don't have to go through that again. So that's my experiences of something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you believe that 12-step programs can be used like alcohol or drugs to filter out emotional pain in dealing with circumstances of life? Or, in short, do you feel that people hide in the rooms?
Yeah, I believe that you can fix anything through those steps. I think those steps can be applied in your life for any type of addiction. So I've found that they work for me when I apply them in my life. I also do find that people, and I did it for a while too, you just hang on and mm-hmm. you're just there because you don't want the other things to happen in your life that happened. Maybe you don't want to be locked up or be in jail or have the cops on your back, or you get your wife back or whatever. So it takes what it takes. And so I think if you're lucky enough, and I don't know, I have no idea, for me, and I can only speak for me, I have no idea why I reached out and why my twin brother and my older brother died from heroin addiction, and that I was able to get what I've gotten because we from the same neighborhood, same family, same DNA, and they were in AA plenty. So I don't know. I just think that people are in there, and you don't hear till you hear, and you don't see till you see, and you don't get up and walk till you're ready. And sometimes you just have to sit there, and the grace of God enters in, and you're saved. And so,
right.
I just, it's kind of a real loaded question. I just know that AA, those 12 steps will work in anyone's life if they apply them. And I don't care if it's whatever it is. That is an absolute foolproof, just fantastic program.
Okay. Have you ever done a 12-step call recently? And can you tell me what your experience was with that when you're dealing with somebody that's actually intoxicated?
I haven't really, I'm kind of gotten away from that. I think that it wasn't like when I first came in and I was a lot more active. But I did have a guy over there. He was drunk. It was a guy from work, and I happened to run into him at the Starbucks, and I saw his life spiraling down, and I kind of waited for him till he sobered up, and then a couple of days later I talked to him a little bit, but wasn't really ready, and just it was pretty sad, and I could see the disease, so
right.
It was not like the one you and I went on 20 years ago,
Yeah, that's an understatement. Thank you, Paulo, for taking the time out of your Sunday evening to visit with us.
Anytime,
I really appreciate it, and I'm sure that the audience got a real kick out of your adventures. Yeah. I know I always do whenever I hear them. You have a good night, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks. All right, you bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, I've known that guy a long time. He's been an incredible friend, and he's been a brother. And it was really nice to hear his whole story because, honestly, I've never heard it. It's incredible. I was at SOBA Recovery Center this week talking to them about possibly getting involved with this show. And while I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the CEO and his executive director, we started talking about the fentanyl scenario and heroin addiction and these kids that are dying just every day and overdosing every day. And the guy pulls out this picture of this young girl and then another one. And these are kids. These are 22-year-old kids. They're dead. And that's just the game has changed. Not that it is a game. I'm not trying to lighten it by saying what I just said, so please don't misunderstand me. But we've got real problems in this country with drugs and alcohol. And hopefully that some of us, like myself, can do something that can wake people up, and maybe we can start helping each other instead of judging each other. We're at the end of this week's show, but make sure to tune in next week for another hour of brutally honest recovery talk radio. Our mission is to provide a safe platform for those who are still suffering from various forms of addiction. We are just people willing to listen and offer suggestions to help those in crises. We leave you now with a brief synopsis from our friend in the afterlife, the late, great John Flynn.
Disappointment. Disappointment is the caboose on the tootsie train of expectation. Anything you want from anybody, you give them what you want from them. It's the only way you're going to get it. Life is about giving, not getting. Day at a time.
Thank you, John. Thank you again, Paulo. And thank you for listening. Stay sober, good night, and good luck.
You're listening to Life Repair Recovery Talk Radio with Rick Thompson, only on LA Talk Radio.